You're listening to Vocal Distortion on FM 89, your Chicagoland home for hardcore, heavy metal, and everything beyond. I'm your host, Austin Paulson, back again this week with a very special episode. Kind of teased this. The prior week, we kind of did like a 30th anniversary, records turning 30. I turned 30. It's been, but I am excited about this episode. However, we have some special guests with us, former band members. Some of us in the room are librarians, authors, vocalists, drummers, cat owners. I'm joined by Dave Hofer and John Mendola. Guys, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is the first time we've met each other, but you've actually been here before.
Yes. I looked it up. It's, I believe it was November 18th, 2000. My old band Off Yourself played in the room just next door, which apparently does not host bands anymore.
I've seen some like old YouTube videos like online, and you know, obviously your recording that you sent me with All Ages show, right? Yes. It's been, you know, some iterations, different hosts. It's always been kind of talked about in a very like special light.
Of course.
You know, like, didn't they air from like 12 to like 4 in the morning or
Probably.
something?
I mean, the other one I remember was Midnight Metal Madness, which of course aired at midnight to 2 a.m. or something. So when you're driving home, see what's up on WONC.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly glad to be a part of it. Do you remember much about that time, like coming through here, or just maybe some of your bands
WONC
that you're in
particular?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you can listen to the recording, has like all of our interview segments on it and everything.
Yeah.
And it's like 90s cringe, you know, completely. But, you know, that's just how, you know, there's nothing that I'm like ashamed of or anything on there.
Of course.
It's just a different time. But yeah, you know, just typical like lo-fi college radio setup. Like, I don't remember like the mic situation, you know.
Right.
I do kind of, now that we're talking about it, I do feel like, because we had 2 singers that would sometimes kind of try to harmonize. And I remember them being like, well, there's no monitors, so we'll just give this a whirl, you know, so you can listen to it and be the the judge of that. I don't know. It was fun, man.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly, you know, sounds that way when you listen back to it, and you even got like a shout out like, oh, Screeching Weasel for
hell yeah.
Dave. Like,
oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, of course. You know, I don't know. I am, you know, it's fun to be here because that was always sort of like an unrealized college sort of stereotype for me. It was like, man, it'd be fun to have a radio show. So happy to do it.
Yeah. And John, you're kind of, you know, familiar with Dave around this time. You guys kind of grew up together. Yeah. What were you guys doing around? We running around just raising hell? Like, what's going on?
What year was that then for here?
2000.
Oh, by then we knew each other pretty well, I'd say.
Yeah.
A couple years prior, just our bands, he was in Last in Line. I was in Kungfu Rick, and we played many shows together and became friends. It's crazy. Our group from Elmhurst and then the group from Glen Ellen and Wheaton all became pretty tight knit friends. Play shows all around the burbs and in the city. As we were talking earlier before we went live. I mean, suburban, you know, DuPage hardcore did become in a way Chicago hardcore.
That's I think that's important to note. You know, I'm kind of new. I got into hardcore kind of later in life. I didn't even really live around this part of I didn't even live in the state for a long time. So, you know, kind of coming back and being able to do this show, it's kind of introduced me to folks like yourself or like some of the history. You know, obviously the scene from the Chicagoland area is like, you know, it's in a renaissance as much of hardcore metal is, but you know, what can you say about the scene at that time? It seems very kind of tight knit and very different from maybe what was going on in the city. Even.
I would say the biggest thing that I think about when I think about like the scene back then, quote unquote, was just that the shows would be way more diverse. This was before like package tours really kind of became a thing and sort of set the template for how I feel like a lot of heavy, quote unquote, shows are now. You know, Degenerate Synapse is playing a show May 2nd, but it's us and then, you know, a couple of like, you know, crusty punk bands. You know, there's like a D-beat band coming. They're a Dutch D-beat band that's coming over, and we're like, yes, we want to play with different kinds of bands. It's more fun that way, you know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing that stands out is you, just had all sorts of different kinds of heavy, for lack of a better term, or, you know, sort of like eccentric, aggressive bands that would play together.
Yeah.
It was,
I don't know. even before that, I think a lot of shows were even more diverse, right? You'd have like a pop punk band.
Oh, true.
With like his more hardcore traditional band, like Last in Line, then maybe my band, which would be more thrashy. So you'd cover the spectrum. It was a lot of fun. I think.
Yeah, throw an emo band in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Why not?
Is it really just like, was it more like necessity, or is it just, because why not? Why the hell not?
I think probably just why not? There's always a finite amount of places to play that accept any kind of sort of underground music. So, that's what punk is supposed to be, right? Like united forces.
100%. And a lot of the bands that we've been talking about are kind of been, cataloged in the DuPage County Hardcore Archive that we kind of mentioned, feature some episodes of WONC All Ages, but, some of the bands that you're in. One thing that I've kind of noticed that, just kind of reading up on your story and music and, your trajectory, even like professionally, is that you've just always kind of been one to like archive things and ask questions. When do you think that started for you?
Everything is because of my sister. So if Allison is listening right now, she knew she would get a shout out. She is 6 years older than me, and she was involved in the Chicago and like suburban punk scene 6 years, like I was 13, she was 19, 20 doing her thing. And I just like looked up to her and her friends like they were gods, and then like being able to go to these shows. And that's when you see like you can do this yourself, just like this whole new world being sort of opened up. And I think the main thing there is she participated in a variety of ways, which, we're also both librarians. We've had a very similar life kind of path. I've just kind of sort of always followed in her wake, I guess. But she played in bands. She also wrote for zines. She would do drawings of bands. She would go to this place, McGregor's, that was in Elmhurst, and do like kind of on the spot sort of like caricature, for lack of a better term, like these little like cute drawings of bands, and would give them to them, which a couple got used in different bands' records and stuff,
Yeah.
So she, just had like exposed me to a variety of aspects in which you could be involved in this kind of like underground music. And I just sort of ran with it,
Yeah. I envy that. There's always the kind of the trope or the story of like having the older sibling that kind of passes things. I was the oldest, so I didn't quite get that. John,
I was lucky.
Did you have an older sibling that kind of turned you on to newer music as well?
I did not.
Yeah.
So yeah, you kind of had to forge it like you, I guess. And,
100%.
Explore. And then it really was friends. So like even when Dave and I would probably be meeting initially, he would easily say, "Oh, have you heard XYZ band?"
Yeah.
And it could be something even like Charles Bronson from DeKalb, or it could be someone from another state or country. Like, "Oh, I haven't." So then, you would borrow at that time. You would borrow CDs or vinyl. We would borrow records or whatever it may be. But that's how you really learn stuff, was the kids you went to school with and the kids we would run into at other shows. And that's how this whole kind of scene just started. Again, it just kind of kept building and building and building. And
Dude, I have to say, I was thinking about this earlier because I knew you were going to be here, you being John. I can think of 4 bands specifically that you played for me for the first time. It should be noted that John had a, what would you call it? Just like a subwoofer?
Yes, I put stereo speakers in my mom's car, my mother's car. Yes, but go on.
It wasn't the first time I'd been exposed to that. My neighbor growing up had like some insane sound system in his car, but John played us Korn for the first time. So hearing like all the 808 drops on the first 2 Korn albums with his subwoofer was great. And then also G Love and Special Sauce.
Oh, that's
wow.
Yeah.
They had like some funky drum and like bass thing going that I remember like, oh, this sounds cool with your subwoofer. And then I listened to it some other time and was like, I'm not really as into this, But then the other 2 bands would be Cephalic Carnage and Cryptopsy.
All right.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I remember listening to Ass Suck with like you and Drew probably at some point.
Can we say that on the air?
Yeah. That one's
get the 7-second delay.
A suit. But that's so funny. But yeah, that's literally how you learned about things, or Maximum Rock and Roll in some other magazines, like that's more of a nationwide magazine. And then like Dave mentioned about Allison, like doing zines or local zines is like, oh wow, like read about shows, read about bands you hadn't heard of. And
the way things were before the internet.
I couldn't imagine hearing something as like filthy as None So Vile on those subwoofers, just like that bass and those.
To be clear, I believe it was Whisper Supremacy. Okay. And also I think you played it on Zach's parents' stereo.
Yeah.
And I remember you being like, man, you got to check out this intro.
That's so good.
It's cool to hear some of this stuff, because even I read even some members of your band, you kind of met through just looking up ads of like
that is
the
like the
backs
most
of magazines.
insane story. If I was like 10 years older, I would have been on that tape trading scene. Like my parents' mailbox would have been blowing up, I caught like the very tail end of it and never placed any like ads looking for pen pals. I did have pen pals and stuff back in the day, but our drummer, Aaron Gutierrez, he told me his memory is insane, first of all. And we met because he was in this band Tower of Rome, who are awesome and, from here. So, of course, you get into that. But I remember him telling me at the Fireside Bowl one time, he's like, dude, do you know that we have actually I've kind of met before? And I was like, no, And he was like, you answered an ad that I took out in Metal Maniacs looking for, well, I can't say their name on air, AC demos and also Macabre and something else. And I must have just seen that he was in Illinois, or maybe even I recognized the town, and answered his ad and sent him some tapes, which he says he still has. I got to remember to ask him to bust those out. But yeah. And, that was just, again, just pre-internet. So that kind of killed off the tape trading sort of culture. And then, flash forward 3 years. Then he told me that. I was like, I can't even believe this. And now 20 something years later, we're in a band together. It could be a rom-com. Yeah.
Shout out to Michaela at Meteor Gem for turning me on to that EP. And it kind of spawned me reaching out and wanting to do this for sure. Now, I definitely want to ask you some more questions, but I definitely also want to play some of the music picks. And we kind of mentioned Kungfu Rick. We have John here as well. I think I heard about this band for the first time through bands like Weekend Nachos. Maybe they were big fans for sure. I hope is it Past It or is it Paste? I'm so sorry.
Pasted into place?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
No problem.
Can you tell me about the song and maybe where you were at the moment?
So in this band, I played guitar, did not write any of the lyrics.
Gotcha.
Primarily there's two singers in this band, or was, and one singer pretty much wrote most of the lyrics. The other guy played sax, I think, or
the Dark Enforcer. We met at band camp.
That's right, you guys did. Oh my god! So there's so many interweaving stories. They were usually very social, emotional, sometimes political type lyrics, even back then. It was a pretty fun band, and I would play guitar in that band, and that's pretty much how Dave and I met.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, let's get into it. It's Kungfu Rick. You're listening to Vocal Distortion with Dave and John here on FM 89. New Jersey Legends, Human Remains, using Sickness as Hero. This EP is crazy. Yes. I love this EP so much. First time I heard it, mind blowing. I always wondered, I think his name's John, or maybe it's Steve, the guitarist.
Steve,
legend. I was like, how is he doing that? I thought it was a kill switch or something like that, but I talked to Steve. He's just using
using the toggle, and I think in the dial, which Zach would do later. Shout out.
Came across a VHS of them playing. It was a really weird thing because we worship that EP so hard.
Yeah,
the photos of them playing on the back cover are from, I think it's a metal fest in, I want to say Knoxville, Tennessee.
Oh yeah,
and then we were actually at Smiler Coogan's. Were you there? We went to go see Cryptopsy, I think.
Wow,
and that dude was selling VHS shows. He was a tape trader guy, and he had a TV monitor set up playing that video at the show. And I looked over and I was like, that's the same, that's from the back cover of the Human Remains album.
That's funny.
And made a beeline over and was like, I need to buy this. So we got a hold of that bootleg and just dissected that video.
That's
how do they, what is how?
There's so many things that you just said where it's just I've never heard of setting up a TV, just merch table insane. Or whatever. That's so fun.
Yeah. And then the funny asterisk to that is when another old band of mine, Synechrosis, we did a week-long tour and stayed in some guy's house, and he had another Human Remains bootleg video. This is again pre-YouTube, and I was like, really? Can we watch it? And he put it on, and there was footage of Dave Whitty from the side blasting, and we were just all oh my god, dude, you got to send me a copy of this, blah blah blah. Of course, never heard from him.
Yeah,
now it's all over YouTube, which is awesome. But it was just we caught a glimpse
of the master.
Sometimes the internet can be beautiful. The crazy thing too, kind of seeing some of those videos on YouTube, kind of blows my mind that none of them look like your typical death metal guy. They just look like a bunch of grungy skateboarders and stuff like that too, which may have been even the first time I heard them. I want to say I maybe heard a Human Remains song like in a skating video or something, but I want to say this is probably even the closest they got to like releasing like a traditional record.
Yeah,
right?
They never put out a full album.
I wonder, maybe propose this question to both of you. Do you have any favorite kind of one and dones? Are there like any bands that stick out in your mind that like, hey, dropped a record that was so good and then they broke up for XYZ?
Man, only one album? That's tough.
Or an EP or, whatever.
We should have gotten these questions ahead of time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just thought of it. I was like,
Charles Bronson.
They
had a ton of splits, but they only did one album.
That's right. Which you kind of had a part in the liner notes of the reissue. I got mine in the mail.
Nice.
We
undamaged.
It Perfect. Was nice. I kind of raffled through it. My sent it to my partner's house, who lives in downtown DeKalb. So it was kind of fun to rifle through the pictures and stuff. We kind of walked our dog around the where the houses were that were listed in there.
Amazing.
When did you meet Mark McCoy?
Oh God. Well, this is another connection with John is I don't know actually like how, you just meet people from being around, and when we, being like the last in line crew, saw Charles Bronson for the first time, just, mind blowing, and then just saw them like any chance we could get. So I'm sure they just like recognized us from being around. There was also a weird connection too, again, through my sister, where Jeff Jellin, who played guitar on the Youth Attack LP, was like friends of friends with my sister. So the two of them ended up working on a project together called American Mosquito. So there was like a little bit of a connection there. But I don't know how that show in Oak Park got put together, but Last in Line, Kungfu Rick, and Charles Bronson all played at a record store, Irritable Records, right? Right. And that was, and then Last in Line, we both probably played with them a couple times. So you just, I don't know, you get to know people, and then flash forward, number of years, and my book had come out, Perpetual Conversion, about Danny Lilliker, and I was working at Reckless Records at the time. And I remember Mark, I would see him every so often if he was like coming home maybe to visit family or something. And one of the times he was in there, I was like, oh, my book is out, you should check this out. And he bought a copy of it, and I just told him, I was like, in like 2000 they released the Complete Disco Crappy, like the 2 CD set of everything, all the splits and comp tracks and the album. And I was like, if you ever decide to release that on vinyl, I would love to like write something for that. And it was just like, okay, dude, whatever, I don't know. It was just a very polite, interaction. And that was probably in like, I don't know, like 2012. I mean, God knows, years ago,
That's funny.
And then just sort of out of nowhere, I got a message from Mark saying, hey, I think we're going to try to do this Charles Bronson reissue, but just the album. And if you are still interested in writing something, then that would be cool. And I just said, yeah. So, and then it was just, again, off to the races,
Yeah. It's so wild to me. I mean, maybe just because I'm so far removed from it, where, I had like my prom at NIU, and I'm like, I think I heard Charles Bronson probably like right over in the student union. That's so crazy. What, like a band like that could exist? Were you guys making trips at all? Like, were there shows like out there on the campus? North?
There'd be like house shows out there. Trying to think, mostly house shows really at the time, like way back when, right? And then later on, there was a couple smaller venues, I think.
There was the House Cafe, but that was much later, like in the early aughts. And I saw the Blue Meanies there one time. I think that might have been like a school sponsored show or something.
Really?
Yeah, them and Less Than Jake.
Wow. Yeah. Dang. What do you? I know Mark's been involved in a lot of different projects, and continues to do art for a lot of bands now. Do you have any other favorite projects of his outside of Charles Bronson that you enjoy?
Oh, I mean, Das Oath is awesome.
100%.
Yeah. Authority Abuse played with them at the Odom, John and I's old band, where it was us, Das Oath.
Was that Devoid of Faith in that?
I want to say maybe it was the Gordon Soley MFers.
Yes,
might have played that show.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I like the Oath, Das Oath. I don't know.
The song that you picked out has a really great let's say prank call, I guess.
Mhm.
Do you know anything about Bulldog Records? Does that sound familiar to you? What is Bulldog
I
Records?
actually never went there. That was like, I don't know. I was kind of late to get my driver's license, which sort of like hindered things a little bit. But Bulldog Records was the Victory Records owned record store.
Okay, that makes sense.
So they carried, other stuff, but I think it was primarily a tool to just like sell Victory merch, and releases. But they did shows in the basement there. Remember, it's like you hear stories about, I don't know. I'm not even going to paraphrase because I wasn't there, but Victory Records hardcore just is a different breed, pun intended.
There you go. Well, I think it came out beautifully. I am so happy that this is available for people or those who got it. I remember I was at a Bears game when it dropped, and I was like, oh God, the internet, please! Like the Wi-Fi wasn't connecting. But I think if you have it, this is a really, really wonderful piece of I guess Chicagoland history to own for sure. Let's get into it. It's Charles Bronson, FM 89 Vocal Distortion. Morbid Angel, a little death metal for your Monday evening brainstorm here on FM 89 Vocal Distortion. We're here with Dave and John. I guess we kind of, share some tastes here with the Blessed Are the Sick. This is a fantastic record. It was the first one I got. I remember ordering it from Earache and was so confused as a kid. I'm like seeing the royal mail. I'm like, what? I've never got this before. We've kind of mentioned a lot of hardcore kind of starting out this part of the show. What drew you to death metal? If you're both, obviously you're wearing a Cryptopsy shirt, John, but what drew you to death metal?
Geez. I mean, that was just like a formative years thing when, you just, like John was saying before, when you meet friends, like my sister was throwing me definitely more of the punk stuff. As was, just like what she was involved in was more like that 90s kind of Screeching Weasel, Vindictive, Sludgeworth, like all that stuff, which I love to this day, of course. But, then you meet friends at school that are like, check out Altars of Madness, check out, Cannibal Corpse, check out Slayer. And I don't know. I was just like into the deep end right off the bat. I don't know. I think it's the same thing that appeals to everybody, where it's that kind of like, like that sort of positive release of like that kind of negative energy. It just has like that thing to it. You can't really like put your finger on it. Just like, somehow like vibrates all the water in your body the right way, I don't know. And then also, thinking about it now in hindsight, part of the appeal is that, it is very difficult and takes a lot of dedication to play a very like harsh and unpopular kind of music. So that sort of just like dedication to the craft is, I think, very appealing. At the time, though, you just wanted like to listen to the band that has the guy with an inverted cross burned into his forehead, though. You know what I mean? I came to the other realizations later.
John, what drew you to the dark side?
I think it's funny. Yeah, Dave, his wealth of knowledge on death metal and stuff is obviously huge. But I think for me, it was kind of like we were saying earlier, too. It's the friends sharing music, but also everything, in my opinion, is almost like a gateway. So like you go from mainstream heavy music as a gateway to then whatever you go to next. And then it just keeps leading you down like a path. So I was never huge into like a lot of death metal necessarily, not like to Dave's extent, but bands like Cryptopsy would stand out to me because the riffs and then also the drum, and me playing guitar and drums, I can appreciate both of those because their drummer flow is an amazing and very creative. He was doing things so differently in like death metal that's what, for me being, maybe 17 at the time when I first heard him, like, you're like, holy cow, like this is so different. It's not 5 minutes of just double bass and like kind of boring drums. It's like he was doing thrash beats in a death metal band. 100%. So like this was very intriguing to I think a lot of us. And I remember shows like, maybe it was one of the Smiler Coogan shows out there, but like in Joliet, be a small little club. And here's this band from Montreal. And there's me, Dave, maybe the drummer of Pelican and a couple other bands probably. We're all sitting there. Yeah, shout out to Larry. We're all just sitting there with our mouths, like our jaws on the floor. Yeah. And we're all playing different styles of music on our own, but watching this one guy, we were all just in awe. And I think it's just, to me, that kind of music, or it's just like Human Remains, it really, when you do something creative and different, it really like grabs me personally. So.
To be historically accurate, though, Smiler Coogan's was in Chicago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just don't want to, anybody to.
What was the place?
The phones don't light up.
What was the place?
The poser line.
Yeah,
poser alert.
What was there was a place in Joliet. What club was that?
I mean, there's still a place there. It's been like 20 different things.
Yeah. I think it was one of those clubs. Yeah.
You mentioned kind of off air that this record being as, divisive as it was. I think I read somewhere where Fenriz loathed it. And like maybe that was one of the records he quoted, like that modern production of like him kind of abandoning death metal altogether. Why do you think this record is so, maybe quote unquote like controversial in that way?
I mean, I think it definitely more was when it came out in 1991 because it was, it had whatever good production, if you want to call it that. It was just a little more slick than I think a lot of things that came before it. I wasn't there for the controversy. I came in after it was already just like universally kind of, not hated at least.
Yeah.
I think that's probably all it was, just like anything when something's very underground and like raw and kind of primal, then like keeps evolving, you're always going to have haters.
Did I rewrite? You did like kind of I want to say like spotlight or like a music storytellers kind of event for this record in particular.
Yes, I did. I don't say, oh God, in a groaning way. I just am surprised to hear about it is all. Yes. This was an event called Liner Notes that was put on by this woman, Shannon, who used to work at the Metro. And she would have people come and talk just about, I don't know, for like 10 to 15 minutes about just an album that they love and why. And so just me being me, I made like, I don't know, I had like all these like sound bites. I made a string of all of just like the grunts and like groans on the album that aren't actual words. Like I just made like a medley in Audacity of all of those and played it. And yeah, just discussed like all the kind of quirky aspects of that album. And eventually she started recording the presentations. Unfortunately, I probably still have like my slideshow that I made. I went like all in on the AV presentation. But side note, my wife and I were in Brussels one year. We were going to go see friends in France, and then that fell through. So we're like, well, what do we do? And she's the travel expert. So she said, well, we could go here, there, Brussels for the day. And like an alarm went off in my brain. I was like, wait a minute. I'm pretty sure that the art museum there has the painting that's on the cover of Blessed Are the Sick. So we went and saw it there.
Well, I mean, how was it? What was the experience? That's incredible.
I blacked out.
That's awesome.
Speaking of some pretty pivotal death metal records, this record, I believe, just turned 30, maybe like a few weeks ago. The Bleeding, Cannibal Corpse.
Oh,
what does this record mean to you? How does it fit into your musical journey?
Well, I mean, Cannibal Corpse was like, one of the first super extreme death metal bands that I heard. Them and Deicide. Deicide Legion to me is kind of like the pinnacle of death metal, but Cannibal was like right there with them, in the 90s formative years. But The Bleeding is just to me kind of the one, where they weren't like super technical yet like they are now. And, Chris Barnes' voice was like just starting to go, but it's still like very raw. And, just still like very dark. That album is like very cancelable, although somehow they still just like are seen as like fun loving Cannibal Corpse with all of like these disgusting lyrics. I don't know, kudos to those guys. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of this album without, I had a teacher in high school who I knew somehow, she must have told us or mentioned it, but she lived near this record store called Phoenix Records, and The Bleeding had come out. And I asked her, I was like, if there's any way that you could, if I'll like pay you back, but if you could stop and pick up this Cannibal Corpse album for me, I would be like very appreciative, And I came back in the next day and had my money. And she was like, oh, well, I wasn't able to do it, but I'll definitely do that. I was like, okay. Came back the next day. She had gotten the album for me, and I was sure to tell her, I'm like, make sure it's the uncensored version. I got to have the uncensored version, and paid her back. And it was the day before winter break. So she left early. And then we had a teacher come in from the other science class to like substitute. and I left it sitting out on the lab table.
Oh, no.
And I remember like going away and then looking across the room and seeing him picking it up and looking at it. I was like, oh boy. And then went over, and sure enough, he was like, this is disgusting. Where did, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, I just said it was mine. Didn't sell out the teacher or anything, and he just, let me off like, if I ever see this again, blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay. But yeah, that teacher shall remain nameless. If they hear this, thank you very much. I still have that CD. But yeah, I don't know. To me, it's just kind of like pinnacle Cannibal Corpse. I don't know.
Yeah. And then fast forward, maybe even a few years later, you actually got to interview Alex Webster for, was it the magazine you work for, Planet Punk?
Yes, I actually interviewed him twice, once for Punk Planet and then once for my book, which was really cool because, I mean, for the Punk Planet thing, that was all like through kind of proper channels, just whatever album had come out at that time. But then when I was working on my book, I tried to get a lot of other bassists in there, as Danny is a bassist, and obviously admire Alex greatly and his band, and reached out through all the proper channels and was just kind of like, I don't know, I was like friendly with the publicist at Metal Blade at that time, just through working at Punk Planet. And they were just like, yeah, just like, it's cool. Like, whatever, he's cool with it. And like with no real direction or anything. Yeah. So I just went to the show at the old House of Blues, which I kind of realized recently, side note, doesn't really like do metal shows anymore. It doesn't really seem like, but they used to do like all of them. Yeah. And yeah, just like waited outside by the tour bus after the show and was like, hey man, like, you might remember me from this other interview, but I'm, working on this book. And he was like aware of what was happening, and just did like a quick informal interview about like bass and whatever. And just very nice guy.
That's so sweet. Well, let's hear a little bit of Alex and Chris and the whole gang. An experiment in homicide, Cannibal Corpse on FM 89, Vocal Distortion. You're listening to Vocal Distortion here on FM 89, your home for hardcore heavy metal in the Chicagoland area. I'm your host, Austin Paulson. I'm here with Dave Hofer and John Mendola. Thank you guys so much again for joining us. We are just coming out of a crazy Brutal Truth track, which is fitting because you wrote the book on it, basically. Dan Loker book, at least, Perpetual Conversion.
Yep.
I love the story of like how it kind of came to be. I mean, it seems like it took maybe a few years, but the classic, and I think the kids say this, you basically shot your shot and it worked out. Like completely just out of the blue.
Yeah, that was, just... I don't know, man. It's just, I always sort of had like a hard time saying no to things, which is like when John and I were in Authority Abuse together, I was in 2 other bands and like in school and working full time. I just like didn't know like how to quit, but as you get older, that's sort of like you slow down, but I still am always kind of on the lookout for just stuff to do. I don't know. It's just how I'm wired. And yeah, long story short, ended up going on tour with the reformed Brutal Truth in 2007. And then again in 2008. And it didn't really like dawn on me because Kevin, their singer, was more my connection to those guys because he used to live here, in Chicago. Mm-hmm. But, we all met for the first tour in Newark at the airport. And it kind of dawned on me going through the airport. I was like, wait a minute. It's like, I'm going to be in a van for 8 days with the dude from SOD. Like it didn't really like, I don't know. It just didn't like really click until that moment, and then, I don't know. We all got along and then they ended up doing Europe dates again, the following year, in February of 2008. That was fun because I got to spend my birthday in Barcelona trying to, make change and, lightly imbibe at the same time. I had to be responsible. I was the merch man, of course. But and then it was just on one of those drives where Danny is telling some story about something awesome. I don't even remember exactly what, but I was just like, dude, you like if you had a book, I would buy that book. Yeah. Like, I mean, I loved SOD and Brutal Truth. And he was just, Danny being Danny, like, it's like I don't think I'd ever like just be the type to sit down and like write it all out, you know? And I had like a little bit of a writing background and was just kind of like, all right, duly noted, Mm-hmm. And then when we got back, like a couple weeks later, I hit him up and I was like, hey, I would be interested in trying to put something together. Like, I don't know that we could get like a book deal or like an advance or like have an agent or any of like these pro things I think you're supposed to do, like come up with a sample chapter. Although I did come up with kind of like a demo of how I sort of envisioned it. I made like a 20-page demo that I showed to some people, but it just became apparent that like, you know, an idea is like not enough to get somebody to like be interested. So I just spent like 6 years just, you know, with Danny's help, of course, like getting in touch with people, and went out to Rochester, New York, where he lives with his wife, and interviewed him 3 different times. And then Brutal Truth played in Chicago once, and we did some interviews when he was here, and like once over the phone, maybe. And yeah, then just sort of started tracking people down and just sort of assembling this narrative. And then had a potential publisher for a while, and that didn't work out. And then shout out to Jason Netherton from Misery Index and Dying Fetus. He had published a book called Extremity Retained on this now defunct label called Handshake Inc., who is more of a small record label, but the owner, David, dabbled in a little bit of publishing here and there. And I reached out to Jason. I actually had interviewed him for Punk Planet years ago, and then we'd met once when I was selling merch for Brutal Truth, and he was always just very nice. And would always wear a Charles Bronson shirt when they played in that era.
So, yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was really random. But yeah, so he and I were just like, you know, a little like scene friendly. I don't really know. And I just hit him up like, hey, you know, your book is great. How did you, you know, what should I do? I've been getting kind of strung along by this guy for a couple years. And he said, well, I don't know what he'll say, but you should talk to David, the guy that published my book. And so I reached out to David, and he, by that point, we being myself and Danny, who have like a very nice, like symbiotic kind of relationship. And then my friend John, who designed the book, put, you know, I don't know. There's a lot that goes into that I don't understand, but he laid out all of the inside, placed all the text and the photos and everything. And by that point, we had basically like 80% of it sort of assembled. It was more than just kind of like a demo, you know?
Yeah.
And showed that to David, and he was just very into it and was very aware of Danny and his status and his, you know, provenance. And that was kind of it. Yeah, so that came out October 18th, 2014. So I guess this will help motivate me, but we have been working on a second edition because it's been out of print for maybe like 5 years now.
Oh, excellent.
And so, you know, no offense to Dave, but he was, you know, he put out things that, or I should say he released things that he felt passionate about. And, you know, my book was one of them, but he was not like a promoter or like a marketing guy, you know, not that I'm an expert, but it, you know, ended up being kind of fitting as the book was sort of like Danny, who is underground and kind of like a word of mouth sort of figure. And in that way, you know, we ended up selling through the books with the help of Bazillion Points. After Handshake went under, Bazillion Points took over the remaining stock and then gave it enough visibility to sell through it, for which I am eternally grateful. You mentioned Ian
Love him
earlier, so can't say enough good things about him. At the time, he had a lot of other stuff on his plate and was just kind of like, I don't know about doing a second edition, which I get, you know. So we just sold off what was left and just kind of let it go out of print. And every once in a while, somebody will come out of the woodwork and be like, I just learned about this thing. Like,
yeah,
there's an ebook version you can get, which was my way of just sort of keeping it out there. But yeah, we're hoping for this October 18th to release a second edition, 10 years to the date of the first one.
So cool.
So yeah, fingers crossed.
You know, aside from Danny, obviously, were there, you had a lot of people involved with, you know, kind of providing their own perspective and context. Were there people that you were surprised that you got, or maybe people that you were like, oh, I can't believe they're just like so easy to talk to, or maybe even on the opposite side of it, who was maybe the hardest to track down?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, having the Danny Lilliker like stamp of approval, reaching out to some of these people was obviously invaluable. There are some other ones. Well, kind of like along what you're saying, but Danny had produced an album for this band called Monostat 7.
Okay.
It was like just a weird relapse underground release. It's kind of like drum machine grind, just very weird.
Are you familiar, John?
That name is...
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
They spelled it different. They spelled it
different.
You should check it out. It's very bizarre.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, just very eccentric, you know, kind of like drum machine grind or something. But you know, Danny was the producer of that album, which I thought was interesting. So I just did some, you know, internet sleuthing and was able to track down John from Monostat 7 and got him on the phone. And just, you know, that's somebody that would not, I think, normally get like a lot of shine in, you know, somebody like Danny's story, where it's like, well, here you have this band that, you know, was not exactly like setting the world on fire, but they wanted Danny as their producer, and he came and did the job and offered like valuable insight. And I mean, did some guest stuff on the album. And I don't know, it was just fun trying to find like some more left of center people. Like I interviewed Scott Ian, of course, you know, you couldn't have it without him.
Sure.
I don't think. Tried to get Billy Milano. He was not into it. He just is kind of like reclusive Texas guy now or something. I'm not really sure, but let's see. I think probably the biggest one for me was Gene Hoglan, the drummer.
Wow, yeah, Atomic Clock.
Yeah, because Danny had like sort of humbly told this story that involved Gene, and I was like, let me see if I can get Gene, and just emailed his website. You know, just I try to always be sincere with people that didn't have like the email kind of co-sign. Like Danny didn't have Gene's email. I just emailed Gene's like drummer website or whatever, and you know, just try to be sincere, you know, be like, hey, I'm working on this thing. Danny told this great story. I was wondering if maybe I could get your version of it, you know. And first of all, Strapping Young Lads City is like one of my favorite heavy music albums, and Gene plays on that.
Yeah.
So that was very cool. And then it was very flattering where I got Gene on the phone and he said, I've told this story to people like while touring and just kind of being around over the years countless times, but to have it like on the record in a book, he was very into that. And he just told this very nice story about Dan being a mensch. And yeah, and it was just like flattering to me where I'm like, oh my God, dude, I have Gene Hoglan on my phone in my garden apartment, you know, and he's telling me like, man, this is great that somebody is putting this on the record, because again, it's like I've told it to people over the years, but you know, I want to say what a good person Danny is, you know? So it was, I don't know, it was just kind of a trip, man.
Yeah, it's incredible. People should definitely check it out. I got the ebook myself, but I'm excited to potentially have a physical copy in the future. You know, kind of speaking to this overarching thing of like archiving things and storytelling. You've worked kind of freelance for a lot of publications. You know, not only in our area, like the Sun Times, but, you know, a big fan of Decibel magazine as well. I've been a longtime subscriber, and you kind of, again, putting a story of maybe some local group on you know, on the dock at Macabre, Downers Grove. Oh yeah. You know, you literally, this is such a strange album, and it was so fun to kind of get the issue back out and read through the Hall of Fame, which, you know, is such a great series. You know, were you approached to do this particular album, or you were just like, I got to do this. No. I'm the perfect person to do this.
That's pretty much it. Not to say I'm like the perfect person, but to write that possibly, you know, that was just one where it was just, I think, I couldn't even tell you like specifically. It was probably just a brainstorm. I had done a couple little like blurby things way in the past for Decibel, and the editor Albert, who's great. He was aware of my book and they had reviewed my book. So I was at least like almost a known quantity to, you know, the editorial team over there, and just pitched it. And he was like, I think that would be cool. And so, yeah, then you just start tracking people down. And that was another one where it's like the Decibel rule is they won't do it unless every member of the band is, you know, part of the interview. So that was good. But then I felt like a lot of the Hall of Fame pieces you read, you know, they maybe will have like a non-band member chiming in every now and then. But I was like, I want more than just the band in here. So I tracked down Jeff Klein, who was the engineer and producer of the album. And we had a great Zoom talk. He was like, he's now like a professor or like the head of like an audio engineering department. I forget. We could Google what college he's at or what university he's at. But his mind was just blown. Like, I cannot believe I'm getting an email about macabre, sinister slaughter right now. You know, but he had some really interesting stuff to say. And then Lilliker, after we had released the book, he told me just a great story. You know, years after, I was like, oh man, I would have included that in the book if I would have known that. But I asked him, I was like, would you just type that out in an email for me so I could include it in this? He was like, sure, dude, you know. So we got him in there. And then it was revealed during the interviews, Nefarious, the bassist, told me that Tobias, the singer from Ghost, when he was back in a death metal band called Revenant, I think they were called, apparently was a huge macabre fan and was, I don't know, like when their paths kind of would cross in Europe, like you'd always come out and see macabre and stuff. And so I, you know, just kind of worked the connections a little bit and reached out to Ghosts. I think it was their booking agent, and just kind of, again, like with the pitch, like, hey, like Tobias's name came up in this oddly very specific way. If there's any way you can just like run this sentence by him to get a, you know, like, I'm doing this macabre thing. I understand you're a big fan. Is there any way you would want to just send me a couple sentences? And sure enough, he did, you know, and I was just like, oh my God, this is hilarious. So I tried to zhuzh it up a little bit, but I mean, that again is like one of my all time favorites. And the fact that they're from here. I mean, I got the Death is Just the Beginning 2 comp on Nuclear Blast Records in the 90s, and they're on there. And it says in like the little blurb about the band, like how they're from Downers Grove, Illinois. And I saw that and was like, whoa. Like, that's like 3 miles from my parents' house, you know?
That's so wild.
So yeah, they've always just had a special place in my heart.
It was so cool to kind of, you know, like when you get to the Tobias part, you're like, oh wait, what, am I still reading the same thing?
Yeah, it's crazy.
One of the funniest details that I thought, and you know, maybe this could be a question for both of you as far as like recording wise. One of the details they said about, you know, that maybe the drum mixing or the layering was that they use like a basketball, like just to. Oh yeah. Have you guys ever used any sort of wild techniques like this for production?
No, I mean, we're so old school. You've never played on a click track, right?
No, I've never played on like even a click track, which I don't know that they did, but they use that as like part of the like bass drum sounds. Oh, wow. They like mixed a bunch of sounds together to get the bass drum sound.
I have not heard that.
I will, just because we're on the radio, shamelessly name dropping left and right, I will say that Neil Hennessy from the Lawrence Arms once told me that they did some old studio trick where you turn television just to like a static channel and put a mic up to it and add some sort of gate or something. So every time you hit the snare, it just gives like a burst of that static, like as part of the mix. I was like, oh, that's
interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
But no, I mean, you know, for people like John and I who are just sort of like hobbyist musicians, you know, it's like time is money, you know.
100%. Well,
live.
Well, I'd love to get into this next track from Macabre, Downers Grove. What the heck, Richard Speck? It's FM 89 Vocal Distortion. From Nashville, Tennessee, Yautja, Tethered, The Lurch. I love this band. I'm so glad that you picked this. You know, I lived maybe just like 45 minutes north of Nashville, so I got to see a lot of like hardcore and metal shows in that area, and this was a band that you would always get lumped onto the hardcore and metal shows.
Good.
They're so amazing live, as we kind of talked about. You get lost like watching Tyler play drums. He is
they're incredible. All phenomenal musicians. Yeah. And that was one, they kind of remind me of like shellac, like a super heavy shellac or something, you know. I've always had a soft spot for a good 3-piece. It's another reason I love Macabre so much. Just kind of like, it's about as bare bones as you can get in a band with still having all of the components, you know. And one band I forgot to add to the list, but another great current 3-piece, Mutoid Man.
Oh yeah, there's some guys. Like Cave-In and Converge tie-ins, I believe. Yeah, that's some great stuff.
But yeah, how do you pronounce it agagen?
Yautja. Yeah, Yautja. Or at least that's how I've always been told. I feel like I've annoyed at least one of these members. Like, hey, how do you pronounce that? But
I've always been like a bit of a Relapse Records fan, and you know. Don't check out everything they release.
They put out a lot, but sometimes,
that one caught my ear, and I was just saying off the air, like, I'll bet you this crushes live, and then sure enough, they were just incredible.
I think a friend of mine used to call them like God of Emptiness core. That groove.
Hell yeah.
there's a lot of new picks that you threw on here. Are there some new music that you've been really enjoying as of late? Is there maybe your thoughts on where the scene has gone since maybe those initial days of Authority of Abuse and Last in Line?
Do I go first?
Do you want to go first?
Sure, I guess. I don't know. I mean, one interesting thing is being in a band again now, kind of in the Instagram age, has been pretty interesting. I was like out of the game for a while. Like my wife and I sold our car like 10 plus years ago. And usually I was a drummer, so that made getting drums around pretty difficult. And then went back to school and I filled in for our friend's band, The Eradicator, a couple times. But, wasn't doing anything full time. I was just kind of focusing on my career stuff. And now that school is in the rear view and, working steadily, I don't know. There's always the itch,
Yeah.
And so it's been fun kind of being back out there and seeing like, okay, who's still around making music from 7 years ago or whatever, and who's new on the scene, and playing shows with kids that could technically be my children. It's kind of inspiring, it's like on one hand it's like, oh my God, I'm ancient, but on the other hand it's like, ugh, they're still out here doing it, what I mean? So it's nice.
You've played with a lot of cool bands as well. I saw that you'd shared the stage with Noel. Yeah, they're so crazy. Some of the just most gut wrenching, intense kind of, I don't want to unfairly lump them in with Full of Hell, but it is kind of reminiscent in that way. But
yeah,
definitely a lot of cool bands. John, do you, I know, both of you guys got jobs and families at this point, but do you try to go to shows when you can and see new stuff?
I think it's hard. I think it depends. My bands will play here and there over the last few years, but some of the newer bands, like Dave was saying, some of them are actually pretty exciting. It's kind of new, and it's interesting to see the new spin on things, like bands like Greedworm as a local band, where you kind of hear different elements. It kind of reminds me of what some of our bands are doing way back when, where you just combine different things, and it was very creative and fun sounding. That
is an interesting aspect to aging and still paying attention to the scene, for lack of a better term, where now we've officially lived long enough not only to see all of the fashion officially come back around, but also seeing what the next generation or two is how they're kind of distilling, what to, how do I put this? I remember my mind being blown when somebody was like, Nirvana to kids now is how the Doors were to us in the 90s. That was 30 years ago,
that's tough.
It's kind of crazy. So it's just interesting seeing how then in the underground, Knock Loose is the band I always kind of think of, where I'm like, man, if that band does not scratch my Martyr AD, early aughts metal, early metalcore itch, I don't know what does, but you can hear Meshuggah in them. You can hear, they have I guess
Disembodied.
Yeah, Disembodied,
Sure.
but the themes, are more personal. It's very interesting. And there's just obviously some crushing bands out there.
Yeah. I think I went to a show in Joliet a couple months back when Brian.
You love Joliet.
I do. I keep mentioning Joliet. Sorry. But my friend Brian plays in a band called Coronary. And they're kind of a thrashy type band.
Shout out Coronary.
Shout out to Coronary. And going there, it was almost like being in a time capsule from 25, 30 years ago, because it was nothing had changed in a good way. I mean, it was just it was a greatly well-attended show, a ton of kids in this clothing store down there by the Rialto Theater of all places, and just kids moshing and slam dancing, whatever. And it was just really fun. And I think some of it's always going to kind of be there, but you run into some people that you won't see for many years. And then some of the bands, it's okay, this sounds maybe like a band we would have heard a long time ago, and other bands just do stuff kind of different. So it's, it's all over the place, I think.
With, I know you're kind of a little bit removed from your time at Reckless, but you spent the better part of almost 2 decades there, I would say. Were there certain trends maybe in the industry that you saw? What sorts of things did you notice that maybe when you first started working there towards the end, or maybe even now, if you're still kind of associated with some of the people that work there, what is it about the music industry do you think you've seen happen this century?
I mean, the vinyl thing is the big thing, it was I worked the first 15 record store days, excuse me. And that was very interesting, where I think about, I don't know. Well, I grew up listening to punk, so in the 90s it was 7 inches were very cheap. Bands just press things on vinyl because it was cheap, and that's just sort of what I grew up buying and just never stopped buying it. I mean, there was a period where I was in my car constantly in like 1999 and 2000. So I bought a ton of CDs. Any way to get music, I've never been like vinyl only. But, you know what you like and whatever. Some habits are tough to break. But I remember like going to see Goat Whore one time circa like, I don't know, let's just say 2003 or something. And maybe 2004. And approaching their singer Ben at the merch table and being like, dude, why are none of your albums available on vinyl? Like this, like I'm old. I kind of like just seems like it would be perfect, like metal has always come out on vinyl. I don't know. And he was just like, I don't know, man. I tell them like, I don't know, and then flash forward like 3 years later and Record Store Day went from a thing that was like the first year literally had like 20 releases, maybe. And the second year was like 20 or 30. And then like the third year, I was like, wait a minute. I'm like, there's 200 things now coming out. Wow. And it's just gotten like bigger since then. Shout out Scott Thompson, aka Scott Harmless. I remember he came into the first ever Record Store Day when I was working. And he was literally just like, okay, well, I was kind of looking for this thing or maybe that thing. And I was like, okay, well, there's only like 8 things to choose from. And he literally was just like, well, I'll just take one of everything. There were like so few things to buy. And then it was just like a bomb went off, Yeah. So that was probably like the biggest trend. But in terms of like genre and stuff, I don't know if that's really what you were asking, but
well, then fast forward and you can buy vinyl at Target.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But that was like obviously the big thing, that I noticed working there was just like to me, or not even just to me, but like to the store. Reckless has been there since '89 in Chicago. They never stopped carrying vinyl. That's always been their bread and butter. And to us, it kind of never went away. So I think we were all like a little shocked, like, oh, everybody else is now just like catching on again, that this is still like a viable, platform, if you want to call it that, or means of releasing music. Now it just seems insanely expensive. But yeah, I don't know. We could talk about the whole like vinyl revival all night. But
well, it's at least good that, at least especially in this area, there are places that I can go to and kind of cater to my niche kind of things. Like I can go to Reckless and find some like, probably old Kungfu Rick release or something, or, Meteor Gym was like definitely like a great source of like, I've never been to a record store like that where it was like so specifically catered to one thing.
Yeah.
One thing I'll definitely never see at like a Target or like a FIE or some of these places are like the in-stores that you kind of had a part in doing. Some of them were crazy. I mean, like Run the Jewels, Jack White, ICP.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
my greatest professional accomplishment to date.
How do you get how do those get organized? Like, how do you get in touch with these people?
Well, that was like one of the things that had me working there for so long is that in our little department, which was ordering the new releases and then like the catalog titles, got to make sure we always have Abbey Road in stock, that kind of stuff. But when artists were promoting new releases, that was just related to our department. So all of the requests for signings or performances would kind of just like come through us, myself and my handful of coworkers that handled all that. And on the other side of the coin, I guess we were in a position, it was almost like a curatorial position in a way where we could really sort of stock things that appealed to us personally and obviously other people, but like we got to kind of put our own taste or like our own spin on the selection of materials. And then with that, when you have an opportunity to do an Insane Clown Posse signing, somebody like me that's been very sympathetic to their cause for many years, I jumped at it. Others probably wouldn't have. But you can also reach out to people that are coming through town. I didn't have anything to do with it, but one of the earlier ones, and a great example was the band from Minneapolis, Dillinger 4. They had a over 21 show booked, and then it may have been Jeff Johns. I'm not sure. Shout out to Jeff Johns regardless. But as an all ages option, they came and played like the same day, but before the 21 and over show at Reckless. It was awesome. So cool. Yeah. So that was a fun thing, where you, another good example that I had something to do with was this band from Chicago called Gigan, Gigan.
Okay. Yeah.
They're like, outer space death metal. They're very good. And they had an album come out sometime in the 15 years I worked there and said, hey, we should do an in-store. And they came and played their insane, like Morbid Angel death metal. Erin Page, the artist, she made like these sick glow in the dark posters for it. I mean, it was just fun putting stuff like that together. They weren't all winners, but some of them were.
Speaking of putting on locals, though, I mean, the one picture I saw for sure was like SOS and Sick Tired at the store as well. Yeah. That like picture of like kind of above looks insane.
That was fun.
Were there any other locals that you would have loved to like? It just seems so like crazy to me, like a band like both of them could just be in a store midday while people are doing their shopping.
Well, that was another thing that I really liked about working there, is that to me Reckless was always like the punk store. I mean metal too, of course, but punk for sure. That's where we would go to find 7 inches, and I felt like everybody that worked there still embodied that sort of like FU spirit of punk, where we were like, okay, we have the opportunity to have these 2 sick bands do a record release in store. We had like a limited cover. There was like an insert or something that came with it. And we were all kind of on board with the idea that like, grandma could come in, while she's out like shopping with her family and like Sick Tired is playing in our store and they can be mad about it. And well, too bad. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, sorry you came here when Sick Tired was playing, but that's just the way it is, But yeah, Bong Ripper played at the old store once, and then I did not like, I don't know. I'm not an electrician, but they plugged in their wall of amps and just like immediately started blowing fuses. And that was probably me at my most like scrambling. I had an extension cord running from like where they were playing through the trade window, like around a CD rack. And then I was like, I'm sorry, I have to unplug the coffee maker. We need this outlet, Yeah. And it's funny because I look back on that and like completely cringe. I feel bad because those guys were my friends and I was trying to be helpful. And then they just, all the momentum just kept getting killed. But I don't know. When you talk to those guys, they're like, no, it was memorable. I'm like, okay, hopefully for the, in a good way. But yeah.
Speaking of some more locals here, we have a song from Hate Force, their new record, Systems of Terror, going to be coming out this Friday through Closed Casket Activities. I'm absolutely in awe of the singles that have come out. I've been waiting a long time since that debut record. What can you say about this band? I know there's like definitely members of other great Chicago bands in this band in particular.
Yeah. I mean, this is just, the things I picked out, not the local things I picked out, I should say. I feel like a lot of them have just ties to what we're talking about in Hate Force for sure. It's the brainchild of Drew Brown from Weekend Nachos. Right now he's playing with Spitalfield. He was in a band called Landmine. He's been in a bunch of great bands, great musician. He's one of these freaks that can play like every instrument and that you just hate in a love to hate kind of way. Like, how do you do all of that? And Drew is he's just ahead, you know what I mean? And it's great to see that, like, okay, I met this guy when he was in 8th grade and he's, flash forward 20 something years and he's still in a band called Hate Force. You know what I mean? I'm like, it just warms your heart. Like, some people are just lifers,
100%.
Yeah. And then James from Harm's Way is their singer. And I'm not super tight with him, but, it's just part of the big extended suburban late 90s, early aughts family. So true. You love to see it.
Very true.
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's get into it. It's Descending Down. It's Hate Force, FM 89 Vocal Distortion. Nequia, FM 89 Vocal Distortion. I'm here with Dave and John. I have a question for you. So I just turned 30 today. So
happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Man. Thank you for spending it with me and playing some music. I appreciate it.
Vice versa. You could be anywhere.
Yeah, this has been fun. But I'm curious, you guys are just a few years older than me. You seem like good kids with some head on your good head on your shoulders. But maybe just a few years ago when you were in my shoes, maybe like what would you tell your younger version of yourself? Have you learned anything now that you'd like to maybe? I'm sure there's no regrets, but like, what would you tell your younger self? What would you, if there was anything? What advice would you give?
For me, stop buying cars, probably. I mean, you learn so much as you go, and I think being older now, your parents, you hope, try to steer you the right direction, and a lot of times you look back and like, okay, they were kind of right about this, maybe, or like certain things, and obviously not everything, and of course, parents do the best you can with what you have, but I think as you go through life, you could do things smarter, maybe, but at the same time, you just hope you're making the best decision at the time and living your life to the best and doing like the things we do for fun and music. And, again, like I wouldn't be sitting here today if I didn't, pick up a guitar and then meet Dave later. Yeah. And it's just an amazing group of like friends. And I think it's, just staying, as close as you can. It's so difficult over the years and with big friend groups to stay super close. And it's almost funny with the electronic age now too. It's almost like you have a number of friends, but your actual close friends, I feel, is very small, like smaller than ever, maybe. So like, it's a weird dynamic these days, but like even, Dave and I like kind of reconnected times too. And just, it's like we never, never split. And it's the same thing with our other mutual friends, or even some of the friends from his band that came on to like one of my bands, let's say like Zach or somebody, like you just kind of always pick up where you left off. But I think good advice is just,
don't buy a ton of cars.
Keep good friends, keep them close and stay in contact. And I don't know.
What do you think, I agree with that. Let's see. I mean, I feel like it's a good thing to just try to always have like follow through or like follow up. A lot of people have good ideas, but don't just have that extra little something to like do it. I mean, even just to be in a band, to find like 3 to 4 other people that are able to commit to rehearsing and writing and hopefully playing a show and recording. I mean, it's not easy,
Which is funny, real quick, and just interject, is his drummer, Aaron, years before you are in a band with him, even Aaron and I would see each other at a show here and there and talk about being in a band together.
Oh, yeah.
But without following up, without making the initiative, without really going. And
that I think you can just apply to anything, whether it's finishing grads or your undergrad or your radio show and making it like as cool as you can make it. Again, a lot of people have good ideas, but no like follow up. And that is sad to me. So, don't overcommit. That's one thing I would also say is that, I don't know. I guess I consider myself to be a somewhat competent drummer for punk. And, there's not a lot of those. So I just said yes to like everything. And I think back to some of like the days where I would like get up, at 7, whatever, go to school or work all day, then like drive an hour to go to band practice at like 11 p.m. and then like do it all again the next day. It's like, how, but you're young, you have that energy, but you can still apply that to now. I'm still even getting better at telling people like, no, I just don't have enough room on my plate, know your limits, I guess.
It's good advice. I appreciate that. And, I know you guys got a lot going on, and look, we're, maybe a few months into 2024. Are there things that you hope to accomplish, whether musically, professionally? Like, what do you hope to get done? Go somewhere? What are you thinking? 2024. What do you hope to do?
I'll go first on this one. Hope to buy several cars.
There you go. Nice.
Smart. No, well, I mean, I hope to get a full-time job. That would be nice. Musically, I mean, we've got a handful of shows coming up.
Yeah.
So just to keep playing like 6 shows with our friends, we're just trying to write for an eventual full length. Just want to have fun playing shows. Spring and summer is right around the corner. It's the best time. Get out and do stuff. I don't know. Just stay healthy and alive and play Death Grind.
Words to live by.
That should be on a shirt. I think for me, I'm actually finishing an MBA.
Oh, nice.
Through the rest of the year, and I was similar to you guys as well, being older in school and also trying to go on tour with bands or play shows. And you don't want to, you take a break from school. That break turns into a year.
Right.
Yeah, I had that same experience. But yeah, I think with me for like HeWhoCorrupts is going to hopefully play in the summer with Dead to Fall. And then also we have another group called Eunuchs who's playing in a couple of weeks, a couple of days after Dave's April 18th show. We have an April 20th show.
Where at?
Downtown with Layer the Minotaur. I think it's at Livewire.
Okay.
A couple of some really solid bands playing that show too. So yeah, it's just kind of fun to revisit. Like Dave said, it's kind of like revisiting something and all that comes with it, the good and the bad and the challenges, but also it's just a lot of fun. It's something we did so much for so many years. I mean, you really kind of live it and
it's like you can't ever like totally turn that off. It's like, how does part of me miss carrying amps upstairs? Like how?
That's pretty good.
But you do, I don't know.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough for being here. I really appreciate
Thanks for having
getting
us.
to talk and chat and hang. And like you mentioned, April 18th at Reggie's Music Joint.
Yep.
No Sleeves Attached to a Rip to Shreds, Nucleus, Shriveled Up. Then May 2nd at One City Tap.
Oh, yeah.
We got some great shows lined up. Speaking of some more local happenings, local bands, Primal Code. I love this band. This is crushing. I believe this comes off of their EP.
Subliminal Master.
Yes, 100%. I know this is like a band made up of a bunch of different like Chicago veterans, The Killer.
Shout out to Eugene.
Oh my
Eugene's
God,
the man.
Gene.
Just
He goes.
Gene.
It's just Gene now. I was corrected where I hadn't seen him in a long time,
It's just Gene.
and they said it's just Gene now.
He
I
shaved
said,
his
Can I have a pass?
He shaved the mustache.
Yeah.
So.
No, those guys are great.
They,
Just good, super heavy riff centric death metal. What more could you want?
I think we should leave it at that. For myself, for Dave and John, thank you so much. We'll be back next Monday on Vocal Distortion FM 89.